Hi guys, and welcome back to the podcast. Today we have Máirtín Óg McDonagh. Now, Máirtín is a Galway man, and he is from the founder, I suppose, of Mind Over Mountains. So, Máirtín, thanks a million for coming on.
You're welcome, Robbie. Delighted to be able to come in.
Good. So, I suppose if we want to start off, for those who don't know you, do you want to talk a small bit about where you're from, what you do, I suppose your background, and what you're working at the moment?
Of course, yeah. Well, I'm originally from Connemara, a place called Carrow, so I'm a Gael Goer. That's where Máirtín Óg comes from. My father was Máirtín, obviously, and I became Máirtín Óg. I'm the eldest of 7. My father passed away at 37, tumour on the brain, and I was the eldest. I was only 8 at the time. There was 4 of us, actually. My mother was pregnant with the 5th one of us. My father died in June, and my youngest brother Kieran was born in August of that year, 1969. So my mother remarried again a couple of years later, and actually my stepfather passed away as well. So that was my beginnings back in Connemara.
Yeah, and from an early age then, were you the oldest son, or how did that shape, I suppose, the years after that, after your father died?
Well, it's only, I suppose, in latter years, in the last few years, Robbie, that has come to light that I did, I suppose, take up a mantle. At the time I was the eldest son, by all means, and I just didn't want to become a burden for my mother. She had enough to do to cope with the rest. So I always took responsibility for myself and I suppose to a lesser degree for the rest of the family.
Yeah.
And I helped them out as much as I could, even when I was young. But I found I was getting jobs and side jobs, and whenever I could I was earning a bit of money for myself.
Yeah, and then do you feel that led on to tying into, because I know you played inter-county with Galway for a good few years, do you feel that tied into maybe a bit of determination, a bit of drive towards getting to that level, or so, like from what had happened in your past?
You're correct, and I wrote a book called Mind Over Mountains, which I launched in December, and it's been a great success. But while I suppose the process of writing a book, as anyone who's written one would know, it can take a long time. It took me physically about 11 months, but during that journey I actually went back and I took a bit of time and just to see exactly about my roots, where my beliefs came from, my resilience, how I dealt with anxiety and all that. So you are correct, actually. I began to from taking responsibility for myself. I think I became older for my years than I actually was.
Yeah, and I suppose to go straight to the book then, what made you write the book?
Well, like meeting yourself for the first time, anytime I'd meet people in conversations and that, whether it was at parties or weddings or funerals or in filling stations, people were always interested in what I had to say, and particularly my adventures and my stories. My mother is still hale and hearty. She's in her late 80s now. She'd kill me for saying that if she was listening to this. But she used to always say to me, well, they say there's a book in everyone. There's at least 2 in you, she used to say. So based on some of that, and when I began to work as a life coach, and I was looking at my life, I wanted people to know what I was about and where I was coming from. And I think from that perspective it's been brilliant, because for people who might not know me from Adam, if they get to read even a chapter or 2 out of my book, it gives them some insight into my mentality, what my beliefs are and where my strengths are. And actually I talk openly about my weaknesses as well, and how I learned to cope with them, what worked and what didn't work. And I think by showing I'm 6'1", I'm not a small man, big Connemara man, but I don't have a problem talking about my weaknesses, my vulnerability, and I think people like that. They appreciate that. We all have them. Some people hide away from them, other people might try and deal with them, and I find that in my life coaching business, once people sit down in front of me, it's amazing what starts to come out.
Yeah, and going on actually that direction of, I suppose, with men in general, and in the west of Ireland, I know it's all over Ireland, but in the west of Ireland there's definitely that front that a lot of men have to put up, that you can't have any weaknesses, you can't have any kind of vulnerabilities. How did you find broaching that at the start in the book? Was it a difficult thing for yourself to kind of go after and go into?
That's a very good question. I was somebody who was always humble. I had quite a lot of success in my early years. I became very wealthy in my 20s. I started off a plant business with a lot of machinery and trucks, and made a lot of money at it. I did a lot of work around Galway and some of the biggest jobs at the time, the Air Square Centre, the Galway Bay Hotel, Jury's Hotel, all of them. I would have had excavators and all them jobs, and I made a lot of money very early. But I was also a person who never had a problem admitting that I had difficulty with something, or I might have shown, I suppose, my vulnerability a little bit. But as I progressed in life and had to deal with my own ups and downs, I began to realise and maybe appreciate that we're all vulnerable in some way. And sometimes admitting it and putting up your hand can be the start of changing things and improving things in your life. And naturally enough, when I went to life coaching, I went myself as a client, and I was coached by a very good life coach. And I actually saw it firsthand then, because a lot of people don't know what life coaching is about, and they're half afraid of it. Nor did I. One of my sisters was younger than me, but like every family, there's someone in the family who everyone is afraid of, and that's not me in my family. It's one of my sisters. But she did call me one night. I was in a bad place. I'd lost my businesses. My marriage of over 26 years had broken up. I was under severe stress. It was just around the time of the global financial crisis.
Yeah.
And both my companies, I set up a second company a couple of years previous to that, where I was developing and building. Both companies were in big trouble, and I was in a bad place. But my sister Angela, she highly recommended I go to a life coach. And I just cursed at her, and I said, there's no fucking way I'm going to any quack or whatever else. And she said, no, she said, I think this person will help you a lot. So eventually I did, and it was the best thing I ever did.
And before we go down the path of life coaching and what that entails, because that's definitely a good segment of the podcast, I kind of want to come back to the vulnerability side of things, because I know there's a lot of men that listen to this podcast. And I know there's a lot of people who are dealing, especially coming out of the pandemic, and in the last year I've noticed it myself with my own clients, that there's people dealing with mental health. It's becoming a bigger thing now. Obviously it's excellent that the awareness is around it at the moment, but I still think that it's very difficult for some men to come forward and talk about it a small bit more. How do you broach that with, I suppose, with other men that you work with? Because I know you're involved in GAA teams at the minute as well. How do you kind of go at that and try be open to talking, getting them to be open to talking about it?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, and it is very important. Well, firstly, I'd like to say that my experience in the last couple of years has been that it's changing. The ground is changing. There's more men coming out now and saying, do you know, I don't feel great about this, or I don't feel great about that, or that stresses me a little bit. What I found in my own difficulties before I went to a life coach, I would have been a guy that might have had over 100 people as friends on my mobile phone.
Yeah.
And when things went wrong for me, not many of them contacted me.
Yeah.
2 or 3 did, and like they weren't life coaches. And that's what I say to people: if you have a friend, somebody you feel comfortable with, or more importantly, somebody that you can be yourself with.
Yeah.
That there's no front and there's no act, and that you can have a cup of coffee with and just sit down and say, I'm feeling shit and my life isn't great at the moment. Even getting it out from within is huge. And I would encourage anybody who has a friend or an acquaintance who they think might be struggling in some way, just to reach out to them and say, look, I'd have a cup of coffee with you. How are things? No, tell me seriously, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
And sometimes that bit of care and consideration that somebody would actually ask and stop and not even look at their phone or anything else going on around them, but give that person the time to look into their eyes and say, tell me, really, are you okay? Is there anything I can do? That's huge.
Massive, yeah. I think when you were at that stage of your life then, that it was that you were saying you were at the depths right after the financial crisis, right after your marriage had broken up, what were the signs to yourself? Like, when did it start to become apparent that you were having your own issues? Because I know everyone has ups and downs. You know, everyone has their ups and downs. So when did it become apparent to yourself that this was becoming a bigger thing and it was actually time to reach out? I know you were saying your sister had stepped in, but she can't make you go there. So when does that click and say, okay, it's actually, I need to take time for myself here?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want to be jumping back and forth, Robbie, but at times it suits the question. But just to give people an idea, like as you said, I was a county footballer. I I had a serious injury which curtailed my county career. I ruptured my ACL. I took out a cartilage, but I just couldn't do the rehab and repair my knee. So, like the consultant I was dealing with, he painted it for me straight out at the hip. He said, Máirtín, you said your county career is finished unless you let me operate on your knee, and it'll be 5 or 6 months. In the 80s.
Yeah.
I didn't even know many people who had ruptured ACLs. I had to Google it and see what it was all about.
Yeah.
So I decided that I couldn't. I was after getting married, starting a business the previous year. So that was huge for me. My father, as I said, had died at 37. I was 8. So early on, there was successes, but there was real lows as well. And during that time and building my business and that, I'd been hugely successful again. Then the financial crisis came and that hit me really hard. But I was somebody who you'd go to if you had an issue or a problem or if you wanted something done. I was that kind of person in a small town in the west of Ireland. And I had a lot of people employed, I had a lot of subcontractors working for me, and I was just somebody who was buzzing and there was a lot happening. But all of a sudden I hated myself.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't control what was going on in my life. I felt helpless. I know they'll say it is a global financial crisis, but it just hit me so hard and I took it personally. And I hated myself. I couldn't face people. I wanted to hide away from the world.
Yeah.
The pain I was struggling with, like some of the pages in my book, people cry when they read it. But it's honesty. It's the way I was feeling at the time. But getting back to your question, and sorry, Robbie, I digressed a little bit. But when my sister happened to ring me, I knew I had to do something. I knew it was gone beyond my control. Now, I had, during those couple of weeks before she called me, I had gone down to the sea, the shoreline. I was living with my sister at the time in a converted little garage. I saw it recently and the hair stood up on the back of my head. I said, how did I spend 4.5 years of my life there? But they were dark times.
Yeah.
But I remember not sleeping and going down at 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning. There was an area there where the stone was way high over the face of the cliff was way high over the sea, and I contemplated jumping in a couple of times. I was that low.
Yeah.
But when my sister rang me and she mentioned this life coach and she said, she'll help you. And I said, what have I got to lose?
Yeah.
And I said, God, like, I'm still me, like, and I had been successful and I had managed to do a lot of good things in my life. And I said, I had grandchildren, I had a son and a daughter. I said, I can't end my life now just because of this pressure I'm feeling. And luckily, I did make that phone call. I reached out to this person, happened to be a woman actually at the time, and I went to her, and it was the best thing I ever did. But did I find a strength or did I give in to a weakness? A bit of both, I think. Some people might say, oh, you went and talked to someone about your problems. I did.
Yeah.
I was honest enough to say to myself, I don't feel able to sort it myself. And I just needed a different perspective on it from somebody who didn't know me from Adam, but was willing to listen to me.
Yeah.
And that's what happened.
So it nearly felt like it was out of your control a small bit, that you had tried to do what you had to do to try to get back into. You can correct me now if I'm wrong, but tried to do what you had to do to kind of get your life back in order, and it was just going on. It was going around in circles, and you felt that you weren't coming back right, and that's when it was like, all right, it's time actually to look for help outside of myself, because a lot of people will take these things on themselves and they'll try to fix it themselves. But I suppose it's once you had realised that it was just becoming a bit of a cycle, a bit of a circle. Am I right in saying that? It
was becoming a bit of a cycle, and not only that, like, where I would be a very accomplished kind of a guy, and I wouldn't back away from a challenge, which we'll find out more as we go through the podcast. But,
yeah.
Like, I just found that this challenge was massive, and I didn't know which way to look. The pressure was so extreme, it was unbelievable. And I was creaking myself, I knew it. And mentally, I knew I was in a dark place. And I'd never been in that place before. Like, I was kind of a bolt, a ray of sunshine if I walked into a room, because I was positive.
Yeah.
And I was making things happen, and I was helping people, and I was just that ray of sunshine. All of a sudden, like, there was this black cloud around me. And it seemed to be constant. I couldn't even sleep at night with it.
Yeah.
And that's where I said, fuck, what am I going to do? And then I said, what can I do? So it was then I just began to ask myself, well, there must be some sort of help that I can get that's available to me. And thankfully, that's the route I decided to go. Now, there is people probably listening to this podcast, Robbie, and I appreciate that. Strong people who might have never been in this situation. My pressures were extreme. They were financial, they were personal, they were every angle of my life. Some people feel under a cloud in everyday life who may not have to deal with the magnitude and the volume of stuff. That doesn't make it any smaller for that person.
Yeah.
It's just as bad or maybe worse sometimes for somebody like that. But I think since that time, which is 15 years ago, when I first reached out, I think things have changed hugely for the better for people now. If only they'd see that.
Yeah, yeah.
But when you're caught under that cloud or in that place, it can be so hard. You think everyone is talking about you. You're embarrassed. You hate yourself. And you can't see any way out of it. Every place you look, it seems to be problematic. And the weight everything is bringing on you, it chokes you.
Yeah, that's a great way of describing it, actually, in that it's a good way to kind of paint the picture of the way you're feeling on a day to day and how the mind reacts to that. As you said, it feels like, as you described it there now, I can't say that I was ever in a position to or can ever say I've experienced something like that. But the fact that the way you describe it as a cloud over them, I've heard people describe it as that before, and it's something that you can't get out of, can't see a different perspective. But I suppose when you actually went to the life coach then, and when you decided to make that change, what did you do? What happened when you went in, you met this lady, you started sitting down having a conversation? What did she dig into?
Well, having studied and qualified myself as a life coach now, I can see exactly, and I'm dealing with people myself now on a weekly basis. But what happened in my case was, when I met this lady first, I didn't know what to expect. I hadn't heard that much about life coaching. And for people who don't know that much about it, basically what happened is I went in, I introduced myself, and she began to ask me questions about myself, my life, where I was at. But what I found was, every question she asked me, she spoke slowly and clearly, but she listened for what I was saying. And not alone did she listen to what I was saying, she listened to how I was saying it. She picked up on the points that were causing me pain or uncomfort, and she picked up on stuff that I was a bit happier about and more joyous about. And slowly, we began a process together where she began to get me to talk more, and she built a kind of a rapport with me where I felt really comfortable. I cried a lot. I got upset. I laughed. I did everything. And every time I came out from one of those sessions, I was knackered. I had so much emotional stuff going on with me. But I suppose the results that came out of it for me, Robbie, and I talk about it to the book, I reference it quite a lot actually in the book, is that I began to go back to basics. In other words, I was still me. I wasn't the county footballer. I wasn't the wealthy businessman. I wasn't the husband. I didn't feel like the father or the grandfather. But I was still me, the same person. So I began to really appreciate simple things. I began to go for walks down to that particular spot where I'd been many times, but things began to change a little bit. I began to look at the 550 problems a day I thought I had to solve, and I began to look at one or two of them and say, right, maybe I'll deal with this today, the rest will have to wait. I began to focus on what was important, what was within my control. There wasn't a lot, but my own thoughts and my own mindset, I could control that. And most of the stuff that was going on for me, and for most people who find themselves in any kind of a challenging situation, be it financial or other, sports is the same thing, as you alluded to earlier. I'm involved at the moment now. It was a big part of my life. Like, as human beings, we load ourselves with issues at times that are really, they're not real, they're not factual. And it takes so much energy out of us. And I found when I stopped or tried to control that, and I got way better at it as time went by, I found my energy was a bit better, and I wasn't focusing and putting all my energies towards stuff that was totally outside of my control. And I began to look at the smaller things and appreciate life differently and just be gentle with myself. And that's how it started. And slowly I began to get a little bit stronger, but there were still certain areas I couldn't go next nor near. But I identified areas where, okay, I can deal with this.
Yeah.
Actually, I can make 2 or 3 phone calls and I will meet these people and I'll try and get this done. The bigger stuff, it was hands in the air. Now, I had another option, Robbie, at the time. The other option was grow a beard, go off to Australia or Bali, where a friend of mine went, or some other place,
and disappear
and reinvent myself.
Yeah.
And sometimes in the last couple of years, I haven't put my 2 hands under my head on the pillow and I say, why actually didn't I do that? It would have been so much easier than the path I took.
Yeah.
Face the music. And face the music was facing part of a life that was outside of my control and that had happened due to economical circumstances, a global crisis, but I was caught in the middle of it. Like I reference the perfect storm in the book, or like getting caught in Everest in a storm. Like I was helpless.
Yeah.
And but I decided to try and help and sort things out as best I can. But I began to do it at a slow
baby
pace,
steps, like
baby steps. Yeah.
Yeah. And when referencing what you said there, that you dug into pain points, things that were big issues for you, is there anything that I know obviously in the book you go into more detail on it, but for now, like what was a pain point? What was a real sticking point? One that you found that was a difficult one to even to face and then to break down about how you're going to overcome it?
That's a very good question. No one's asked me that yet, but and I've got asked a lot of questions recently. But well, I said earlier that I actually couldn't look at myself in the mirror, and that was a difficult one. People say, well, why? I hated myself because I totally blamed myself. I didn't look at it as a banking global crisis. I looked at it as my crisis, my problem. It was my fault that my marriage broke up. It was me that brought all these pressures on our family. It was me that made these, in inverted commas, mistakes.
Yeah.
That was huge. To actually begin to look at that difference and say, well, hold on a minute. I didn't plan for this to happen. I had been very successful. Things had been going very well. Then I began to look at other people, mightier and wealthier and more important people than me, who had vast property empires and that. Some of them were committing suicide. Some of them were just falling like all around. And I began to say, this is affecting everybody. So that began to give me a bit of comfort.
Yeah.
Funny thing to say, but it did, because I started to realise that I wasn't the only one. But it still didn't take away from... my mother used to refer to me as a big fish in a small pond, as regards employer, running businesses. There was a lot of stuff happening around me. I was living in a particularly small area. Everybody knew me. I couldn't hide. I wanted to hide.
Yeah.
And that was difficult, that I couldn't control my own life. I'd lost that. And anything I tried to do within reason had no effect. It was like, pardon the pun, pissing in the ocean. Yeah. You know? Or I think I said it more eloquently in the book. I said it was trying to put out a forest fire with a garden hose.
Yeah.
And same thing, same meaning.
Yeah.
Like,
I prefer pissing in the ocean.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that's the one I prefer too. I think the publisher told me I should maybe kind of phrase it slightly differently. Yeah. But that was the biggest thing, to give in to that vulnerability as a person, Robbie, and say, I can't control this. I'm not able to fix this. Man, when I said that to myself, it was like hitting myself on the forehead with a hammer. Like, I just kind of said, geez, but it actually woke me up too, and I said, actually, I can't. But I have to try as much as I can to sort some of it out. And that's the way I began to go about it.
Yeah, there's an interesting crossroads there nearly with what you're talking about, because it's like there's a certain level of it that you have to take responsibility for, as you said, that you have to take, I need to start putting these things back together. And then there's the other level of it. You can't completely look at it and say this is completely my fault, because there's so many outside factors at play. How do you, that's a difficult one to kind of get between. How do you decide which ones you can take care of and which ones are out of your control? That situation.
As a life coach now and a mentor with people, one of the things I actually encourage them to do at a very early stage actually is that they start to journal.
Yeah.
Now, you're usually talking to somebody who mightn't have written a sentence in years. It can happen. And they're looking at you kind of saying, what do you mean journal? Well, I try to simplify it. Like when I tell somebody that I think they should, go down to the sea, go into the woods, close their eyes and listen to the trees or listen to the sea for a couple of minutes. I said the modern terminology for that is meditation.
Yeah.
But in my day it was, go down to the sea, close your eyes and listen. But it's the same with journaling. What I did at the time is based on what the life coach had suggested I do. I just started to make a list. Now, there's no right way or wrong way in my books to journal. There's just your thoughts. But getting your thoughts out and putting them down, you're forming pictures. And it's like you're forming a menu that's in your head. And you begin to look at it and you might circle something. Well, actually, I can deal with that.
Yeah.
And you might put X's and O's and rub some of them out and put big red marks on other ones. But what you're doing is actually, unbeknownst to yourself, you're setting little goals.
Yeah.
That actually I can deal. No, this is a bigger one because those people are not cooperating with me. I can't talk to them people. So you can't go near them. Push it over to the other side. So I began to pick things out of this journaling that I was doing. And I began to see actually 6 o'clock in the morning I was awake. I went for a walk down, came back, felt great.
Yeah.
Had my breakfast. There was 3 hours gone where I didn't think about any of the other stuff. All of a sudden I was putting these bits into my journal.
Yeah.
And they were jumping out at me saying, God, you need to do more of this, Marty. And then I was saying, okay, well, what can I deal with today of this other list, stuff that needs to be dealt with, or can be, or is within my control? And slowly I began to deal with it, but it began to make me feel a lot better. Because anything that I could have a little bit of control over, I tried to deal with as much as I could. And even in my darkest days, the biggest of my issues, I always contacted the people and I was honest with them, and that really hurt because your pride and your ego, and when I had to sit down in front of people and tell them that call a spade, it was really difficult.
Yeah.
They were angry. In a lot of cases they wanted to get paid or they wanted to get whatever deal was done finalised. I wasn't in a position and it really hurt. Sometimes I'd go into meetings and talk to boards. In front of me there, 7, 8, 9 people, and I'd be cringing, shaking, going up the stairs. But I did it all the time. To this day, I still have the same phone number. I never changed it.
Yeah.
No more than going to ballet and growing the beard. I could have changed the phone number as well, but I never did. I wasn't brought up that way. I was brought up, borrow money, paid back.
Yeah.
Respect the local guard, the parish priest, and whatever else. That's the way I was brought up, and that was life.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. And the point that you touched on there with journaling is something that I push at all my clients, especially with people who, like, I suppose for anyone who doesn't know, the clients that I deal with are people who have recurring injuries, so like recurring back pain, trying to get back to activity a lot of the time and trying to get back into sports or even just back into the gym, and that could be even for a walk. But a lot of the time they have these recurrent issues, and there's 2 sides to it. Well, there's a lot of sides to it, but you have the physical side to it, where they're doing too much. And then you have the emotional side to it, where their body is just reacting to everything because they're highly stressed, they're sleeping poor, their mood is low, and their body reacts to that, and it's interesting how it does. But journaling is a great way of monitoring that and keeping an eye on it and saying, okay, right, well, today my mood is low because I was fighting with this person at work. I only slept 5 hours last night because I have a presentation due at work, whatever. And when you highlight that and you come out and you look at that, it makes such a difference, because then you can see, right, as you look back on it over a week, well, Tuesday, I knew it was going to be like this because I knew I had to get that done, and I knew that I was going to be meeting that person at work. But Wednesday wasn't that bad a day. Thursday was actually better, and Friday was even better. So now your week isn't, everything went to shite over the week. It's actually, well, I had 1 or 2 tougher days this week, and then a couple of other days that are, I suppose, that were a lot better, and I could work on the smaller things. So from my perspective, that's how I use it, and just getting them to jot that down. How would you use that with a client? What type of journaling would you get them? Like, what would they be writing down? Is it the stuff? I know you mentioned that about like, went for a walk today, did that, can tackle this. How do you structure that type of journal?
Well, it's not dissimilar to what you're after saying yourself with your own business and that. And I like the thing about life coaching really, and deciding to go to a life coach, is it's not about me, and it's not about the methods that I want people to do things. Why I think it works, and why it worked for me particularly, is that it's about the person sitting opposite me and what they're comfortable with. But getting back to the journaling, when I'm introducing journaling to someone, I'll tell them to, quite simply, just get a journal, get a notebook, get a notepad, get a fancy one, doesn't matter, whatever, just get one, date it, put the time on it if you like, but do it once or twice a day, just to see what's predominantly taking space in your mind. Yeah. Put that down, the good, the bad and the ugly, it doesn't matter. Just put it down, and you're getting it out of your head and you're writing it down. And just, I'd ask them then, like, to keep it for a week or two, and whenever they're meeting me again, or if I'm talking to them on Zoom or by phone or whatever, I'd ask them to, like, is there any patterns? What stuff comes up? Where's this feeling coming from that you're not feeling great about yourself? What's making you feel like that? Where are the issues? What time does that happen? What person is around you when that happens? What situation are you in? And you're right. You can actually see the patterns going through it. Yeah. No, they will be writing down, the good stuff as well. And I did this and I felt great, and I met this person for a coffee and I felt great about that. I had a chat with my manager at work and I told him how I felt, and they begin to see that, to get out of these situations that they feel they're in, sometimes by doing this and finding out what patterns are coming up, you can find a way actually to improve it. Yeah. So it'd nearly be detailing events and kind of how they're feeling with the events. It would be both, yeah. Both, yeah. That's a good way, yeah. That's a good way of doing it. Yeah. All right, so I suppose then really what we look at then, because I want to dive into the life coaching side of things, but I suppose to give people more context, I want to talk a small bit about how you work on your own resilience, how you work on challenging yourself, what type of challenges you've done. Now I know you've done the coast to coast in America in a cycle with Sean Kelly. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk a small bit about that? Where did that idea come from? Why did you do it? What you learn from it? Well, after the county career finishing, and that was in the early 80s, I'd been on a Galway under-21 team for a couple of years as well. Cork beat us in All-Ireland final in 1981. I'm giving away my age now, but after a replay. But I was playing with the club then for a while, but my knee was giving me a lot of trouble. So I actually went into managing and coaching the club, and we had quite a lot of success. We were a junior club. We won the junior county title, intermediate county title, and I stayed on as a senior team manager for a couple of years. We got to a quarter final the second year. But then my son Sean was growing up and he was playing underage matches, so I'd spent a couple of years and I just felt that the lads at senior level needed a new voice. So I just stepped down from senior management and I managed at underage for a couple of years. But I had started cycling to build up the muscles in my knee and that. Oh yeah. Okay. And then I was doing different challenges around the country, and I heard about this National Council for the Blind of Ireland were organising this coast to coast USA, San Diego to Charleston, South Carolina. 3,000 miles in 25 days. So it definitely piqued my interest. And I just kind of said, I wonder would I be able for that. I had been cycling, but nothing that serious. So I signed up for it eventually. And when I say eventually now, there was a kind of an interview process and you had to do tests and all that. And you had to raise a lot of money at the time. It was £10,000. Really? Yeah, I raised more than 16,000. Jesus, that's a lot. But I began to eat, drink and sleep cycling then, and I suppose I changed my frame hugely. I was sort of a big, chunky 80s midfield footballer and I became kind of a slimmer version. My power to weight ratio changed, my VO2 max went through the roof, and I found that I could actually struggle on the bike, and it didn't hurt me as much as it hurt others. I found actually that my resilience on the bike was serious. Yeah. and in the top level, because that time they tested us in Trinity, VO2 max and lactate threshold, and it was great really because they designed training program for us, and I was introduced to heart rate monitors.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And I trained with heart rate monitors, and just too complicated to get into that stuff now. But anyway, to make a long story short, I went back again, I think 10 months later, and my results had changed hugely because I trained based on the training program that I'd been given. And to this day, that's 20 years ago now, more than 20. I still, if I'm training for an event, I'd be very conscious of training properly. And I would go and get lactate and VO2 max tests done fairly regularly.
Would you? Yeah.
I would, just to monitor where I'm at and where I need to go and to be in proper shape and that. But the Cross America was serious. It was a huge event. I didn't know anybody who cycled a racing bike within 30 miles of me at home. Like, it was just different. Something I decided I didn't know whether I'd be good enough for it or not. But I knew my mindset that this was a huge, big challenge, and I was up for it, and I was prepared to do the work and do the training, and thankfully I did, and we were successful. I think 32 of us started it. I think 13 of us was the number that did it without missing a mile, and I was one of those. I was lucky my body didn't break down, and more importantly, my mental ability as regards the hardship of some of it, I was able for that as well.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and how I know when we talked about this, actually we had a funny kind of a meeting. We met in the pub of all places in my father's pub here in Clare, but it's actually my father that introduced him. When we were talking about that, you were saying that they picked 4 of you on the well, am I right in saying it was 4?
Yes,
leaders on the cycle.
Yeah, there was 4 of us that referred to as the strongest characters within the bunch. Maybe not necessarily the strongest cyclist.
Yeah.
But definitely 4 people that maybe others might lean on a little bit when they might have felt struggled or whatever. And it was kind of funny, not one of the 4 of us really got on hugely well together. And you're laughing at that now, but I did reference that with you the last night. Yeah, it was amazing actually in one way. One of them said to me 1 or 2 the nights before we finished in San Diego, he said, well, I figured, he said, if I saw you sitting at a table, I didn't need to be there. And one of the other fellas was honest enough, like a guy from Dublin. He said to me, to be honest with you, Máirtín, he said, I don't particularly like you. So I laughed as well. And in my head, I'm kind of saying, well, I don't actually like you either. But I suppose strong personalities in a team of 32 people, you will, I suppose there's going to be an element of a clash.
Yeah, you will clash. Yeah,
you will. And it's not a bad thing. I think once people realise that, I think we, each of us in our own ways, were helpful to others. And that's the thing I find about life coaching as well, Robbie. Here I am jumping back and forth again. Not every client could work with me.
Yeah.
And I won't work with every client. Like, what we do first is, I don't know if you've heard of it, I think I might have referenced it the last night when we were here, is that, like, I call it a chemistry meeting, where I'll meet someone and we'll have a chat, and generally, and I'll talk about me and my interests and what I do and how I manage things, and they'll talk about themselves. And then sometimes, if it's not instant, they'll go away, I'll go away, and we'll contact one another. No, thanks for meeting me, I don't think I'm the right person for you. Or the client might say to me, well, I don't know, am I comfortable working with you? And that's fine, because it works better if both sides kind of understand each other and maybe have a bit of respect for one another. So I think it's important to say that to people as well, because like, I get a lot of people who are referred to me by others maybe that I've dealt with, or that they're following me. I have a huge following on social media, and just a lot of people like what I'm about.
Yeah.
And having written the book as well, people who read my book, they kind of say, well, if I was ever going to talk to anyone, I think I'll talk to that guy.
Yeah.
Because he's been through a lot of stuff. Or some other people come to me because I'm really into sports and adventures, and they might want to challenge themselves in a couple of months' time or a year's time or something, and they might want to know a bit about that.
Yeah.
So I cover that as well.
That's good. And I guess then when you, because we actually had mentioned that the last day about how some people just aren't so fit, and I noticed that myself. Like, if you're jumping on board with me, it's going to be a 24-week commitment or a year-long commitment. So it's, you want to get on with each other, and you want to make sure that you're have the same mindset or similar mindsets. Anyway, how do you how do you know if you click with someone, if you know it's the right?
Well, for me, I'd know right away. Like,
Yeah.
I'd be, my emotional intelligence, I'm told, is very high.
Oh, cool.
So I pick up on people very, very quickly. Like, I would actually confidently say that I'd know someone who's having issues nearly by looking at them.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
never mind getting to talk to them. But the client has to be comfortable as well, that when they're going to sit in front of you talking about whatever they feel they want to talk to you about, that they're comfortable that it's not going to be repeated any place, and that you're the right recipient for that information to be able to help them improve their own situations. Yeah.
I suppose then, looking at it, when you were on the cycle and you were going coast to coast, what did you, in your own like personal experience, what kind of obstacles did you come in, or did you encounter? What did you have to try overcome, or is there any sticking points along the way that you were saying, Jesus, that was a tough time during the cycle?
Yeah, there was two really for me. There was one, I think we were 13 days into it. I keep talking about the book. I referenced it in the book because I have a whole chapter actually about cycling across America, and ironically enough, I contacted the publishers before putting that chapter in, because I spent a couple of days writing up the days to put into the chapter, and I was just getting a bit bored of it myself. And I just called the publishers and I said, I wonder should I put a whole chapter in about cycling across America. And he said to me, send me what you have done up to date. So I did, and he called me back a few days later and he said, oh, by all means, he said, it's really interesting. But it's funny, an awful lot of people who are next or near ever been cyclists have said to me that they really loved the journey.
Yeah.
And that they were on the journey with me, and that I explained some of the cycling terminology and stuff I was going through, and that they really enjoyed it. But the two occasions where I really questioned myself, I think it was day 12 or day 13 out of 25 days. We had massage therapists with us, and I was one of the last of the 32 to get a massage one evening. So it left me a bit late coming into the restaurant in the hotel that we were staying in. It was a motel, but there was a restaurant beside it where they could get good places. We did get reasonably good places, but some of the places were shite.
You wouldn't be writing home about it.
But when I came in after massage, the guys were sitting down, and I walked in pretty quickly as I saw a space at one of the tables. I was hungry, of course. We were burning, by the way, 10 to 12,000 calories a day some days. It was unbelievable, actually. But as I was walking in, one of the lads from Galway shouted at me. He said to me, look at the map, Máirtín. And I turned around and I looked at the map of America on the wall, and they'd put a red line on what we had done. Yeah. And they'd put a black line on what was left. And I remember looking up, and I looked the second time and I said, oh, fuck's sake. Yeah. Sorry. But not at all, I just said, like, the way I felt that evening, I was tired, and we'd had a really hard day. We were 8.5 hours in a headwind and very heavy rain coming into New Mexico. And I just said, God, we have another 12 or 13 days of this. And it just, for about a minute, I just thought, I kept looking at it, and I just shook my head and I said, no, man, don't give in to that. You're doing fine, you're doing well, you've prepared for this and that. And there was another, I think, day 19 or 20, I think, we were 5 or 6 days ahead. I suffered hugely with tendinitis in the bottom of my feet.
Oh yeah,
the soles of my feet.
Plantar fasciitis.
And as you know, it was like someone was sticking knives in my.
Yeah.
And I used to, at the food stops, if the stages were over 100 miles, which every one of them were except two, we had 2 food stops. That's the way they organised it. They had one of these RVs that used to pull in. Yeah. And 2 people from Ireland, Mick and Margaret Cowell, used to have food for us and that, and teas and coffees, and we could replenish our drinks and all that. But I remember when my feet were really, I was struggling with them, I used to dip them in ice while I was having food or whatever, and that used to help for about 10 or 20 miles only. Yeah. But as I was going across, it was getting worse and worse, and it was like somebody was sticking 2 knives. And if anybody who knows cycling at that level, your feet are in shoes that are actually stuck to the pedals. So there was no escaping from it. Every time you pressed down on those pedals, it was like somebody was sticking 2 knives. And that, I was really struggling with that. So I was introduced to diphene. Okay. So I found that diphene worked for me, that it nulled the pain at least. Yeah. And there was one particular day before I started to take up the diphene that I really struggled with that. I could hardly press the pedals, and we still had 60 or 70 miles to go that day. And like, there was a moment as well when I just said to myself, what am I doing here? Like, this is excruciating. Like.
Yeah.
But other than that, I know I was hugely helpful to a lot of people, because I found some way that I got into my rhythm. This is what I have to do, regardless of what it is, and every pedal stroke you're moving in the right direction for today's stage. Let tomorrow look after itself.
Yeah.
So.
That's good. Yeah, that's actually very informative. But actually, one thing that I picked up on there is you mentioned, or you referenced self-talk, and yes. You referenced kind of when you looked up at the map, and then you had to kind of shake your head and say to yourself that you just take it day by day, and you focus on what you have to do. Is that something that you use? Is that something that you're aware that you use a lot? Is that positive self-talk, or speaking to yourself and that?
Yeah, that's a very good question as well, Robbie. It's and I do get asked that quite a bit. Sometimes if I do a bit of public speaking now, and sometimes a lot of people are interested in that side of my character, because everybody wants to get a grain from someplace.
Yeah.
And if they see somebody who has done what I've done from the adventurous perspective, some other people business-wise and that, but everybody wants to have a takeaway from you. So in answer to your very well put question, what I work on now, or work with, I've two friends who've been with me for probably about 40 years of my life. Now, they became hugely irrelevant in the last 25 years. One of them sits on one shoulder, and the other fella sits on the other shoulder. And one of them is called Mr. Doubt, and the other fella is called Mr. Suffer. Mr. Doubt is constantly at me. He's saying, oh, geez, Máirtín, you shouldn't be doing that podcast now. Sure, people will have no interest in what you have to say. And sure, you don't know anything about what he's going to be asking you questions about.
Yeah.
And I'll have to say to Mr. Doubt, I'm going to say, no, I'm okay with this actually. I wrote a book on this stuff. I'm actually dealing with this every day. And he'll say, oh, okay, I was just checking. So, like, you know, sometimes they really remind you now. The same guy will remind me if I'm up in Dublin and I want to cross the street, Máirtín, there's a bus coming. And I look right and left, and sure enough, there's a bus coming. But, you know, I've befriended Mr. Doubt because he makes me up my game.
Yeah.
He makes me sharper. But I'm bigger than him. And I've learned that with my resilience, and I'll say, well, thank you, I know you're out today with me, but I'm okay with this. The other guy, Mr. Suffer, he doesn't want to get out of bed at all.
Yeah.
When I'm preparing for something, whether it's meeting a client, whether it's driving over here to meet you, whether it's getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to the gym, Mr. Suffer will say, Máirtín, we can't be doing this again today. Why don't we just have a coffee, relax, chill out? And I say, come on, man, we're doing this.
Yeah.
I don't give in to him. But I found when I actually make these characters real, that I'm able to talk to them, but I am in control. Whereas I think what happens to it now, that's oversimplification. But for a complicated person, I'm really into simpling things. I like that kind of, that you'd actually don't make a big mountain out of a molehill.
Yeah.
Like, okay, what have we got to do? It's a huge, big challenge. But okay, let's prepare for it. Let's work at this. And Mr. Doubt and the doubts will keep coming at you, but you get better at them and you begin to say, no, I'm preparing for this. And you Google and you learn and you prepare and you train and you do you talk to people, you find out as much as you can and you prepare yourself to the best of your ability. And Mr. Suffer just has to put up with it. But every so often, like the night I met you, I'll bring him out and I'll say, now aren't you enjoying yourself? We're having a few pints of Guinness. And there's no suffering. And he laughs like you do. And he's great.
That's a good way of putting it, I think. And having that kind of, knowing that it's going to be there, you're nearly preempting it. And
but I think you have to expect it, Robbie. I think, like, in every decision you make, if you want to grow and if you want to progress within any part of your life, it's not going to happen without a little bit of pain and discomfort. And sometimes it'll be with the people nearest and dearest to you that won't like that you're not doing what you used to do. That you're changing a bit and you have other priorities. It's going to hit those people sooner than anyone else. Or a good friend of yours who maybe you mightn't be going out drinking with 3 nights a week anymore because you want to give that a bit of a change and you want to... Well, his or her opinion of you is going to change because they're going to say, oh, hold on a minute, you're changing.
Yeah.
And that sometimes holds people back. And what I'm dealing with clients, and I would say to them, I call it influential factors. There's positive ones and there's negative ones. And sometimes it can be father, mother. It can be wife, girlfriend, partner, best friend. Their noses can be out of joint if you begin to want to make changes in your life. So sometimes when people are made aware of that, they expect it and they're not as uncomfortable with it when and if it does happen.
Yeah. And how would you go about broaching that then with them? How do you go about tackling that issue? Because if it is their best friend, if it's someone that they grew up with, if it is a partner, someone that they've been in a relationship, or if it's in a marriage situation, and that person's looking to change themselves, but they're finding there's kickback from the people around them, how do you get them to kind of broach that situation and take it on?
Well, with the client, it's working around it, and like it'll usually come up, or if it doesn't, I'll bring it up, or I might tell them, do you know when you're doing your journal next week, and this we might be a couple of weeks into sessions now, a coaching project or whatever you want to call it, and I might say to them gradually, you know, will you do this for me now? And the next time you come back, I'd like to see a list. Would you mind putting down a list of what you feel good about in your life and things that you don't feel so good about? And sometimes they'll say to me, oh yeah, I have no problem putting down the ones I don't feel good about. Yeah. And then they'll start on the ones they feel good about. They'll be surprised because the list is much longer than they ever realised it would be. But as an extension to that, then I'll say, while you're doing that then, or on the next page, will you put influential factors on the top of it? And they might say to me, what do you mean? Well, things that would influence your decisions, that influence your life, and put positive ones one side and negative ones the other side. And they'll come back with that. I might just say to them, well, you know, what could positively help you? This. But what do you want to do? You might say, I want to lose a bit of weight. I want to be better at something. I want to change my job. I want to have a better relationship with my partner. What are the positives? What are the negatives? She won't listen to me. My manager I'm afraid of. I'm not happy in my job. There's too much pressure. I'm working 60 hours a week. Whatever, put them down both sides. And you begin to see the pattern. And then you can say to them, well, look, what these are positively influential. What do you think of these things? Oh, God, yeah, I didn't look at it like that. So how are you going to tell your husband or wife or partner that I need to lose 3 stone weight and I need to go to the gym and I want to cut back on the socialising a bit? Well, the only way to do it really is, usually the client will come up and say, well, I actually have to have an open conversation. Say that I don't feel great about myself and I want to make improvements. Would you work with me on this? I'll say to them, well, usually that step is huge because you're involving the other person. You're not just going off and doing it and more or less giving them the fingers and saying, well, I'm doing this and fuck you. Yeah. So I think conversation is huge. And it's usually, it's not all negative. Some of it can be very positive. And that person in your life might love to see you making changes. And they might love to see the changes in you. But it can go the other way as well. Yeah.
I guess on that point, yeah, that's a great point, and it's a great way to look at it. It is about asking the right questions then, isn't it? Asking the client the right questions and making them ask the right questions of themselves so they can give themselves like a different perspective or a different view on what's really holding them back in a way. Would you say questions, like the type of question that you ask, the way you ask it, is a big part of that?
Oh, it is very important, yeah. Well, we're taught, like, while doing the course, you're taught to ask open-ended questions. In other words, don't ask a question that the answer will be yes or no, because the conversation just dies. But I've found, and my experience has been now that, like, it flows, and for me, you see patterns, and you see where people's you can read where people's mind is going, and you can see where they're comfortable. And I know it's used an awful lot now, they're in flow, but for me you can see the positive energy, and then you can actually pick up, like a red rag, the negative energy. So what you're trying to actually get somebody, and I keep referring to the person sitting in front of me as a client, but I mean it in a good way, you can exactly see where the person needs to give some of their attention to change a certain situation so as to improve themselves and how their lives are.
Yeah, and is there an element of spirituality involved in that as well?
There is, yeah, and spirituality for me, like, I would be a spiritual person. I wouldn't be going to church every weekend, but like I would bless myself, and when the pressure is on, every so often I might have a chat with himself, and I do believe that there's somebody someplace.
Yeah.
And from the way I live my life, I try to help people, full stop, and that's my belief. But I do believe that spiritually, we need to realise that we are spiritual, and I think from meditation you get a bit of that. That to me is touching on that spirituality. It's your inner self, and it's sometimes it can be a little bit difficult because depending on the situation you're in, like I was in myself, when you close those eyes, it can be an awful lot of negative stuff. But I think it's a process that you have to go through, and with help and by talking to someone, you can actually begin to look a little bit more on the positive stuff. And then it's like a weighing scale, or a seesaw. Yeah. Where the negative stuff and you are on the other side, and it's weighing you down in the beginning. But after a time it begins to level up, and then after another period. But it's your mindset and how you set about making these changes, and that you begin to look at yourself differently, and that nothing is set in stone. And I think we touched on this the last night, where I referenced paradigms. Yeah. And like in everyday language, to me, that would be like how you're programmed. Yeah, yeah. And I believe like we're all brought up in a different way, but with similar beliefs, and that you can't do this and you shouldn't do that, and this is the way we did it. And sometimes that needs to be questioned. Yeah. Now, sorry, now there's two people just walked up past the window there when you were saying that. But to go back to the idea of paradigms, with like what? Because I suppose the people who don't understand what it means, I suppose what's the easiest way to describe a paradigm? It's your outlook on life. It's it's your perspective on life. Is that how you describe it? It is, and it's your belief system as well. Your belief system, yeah. Yeah, and like I talk to people sometimes about their mindset, because I'm a huge believer, like 99.9% in, I believe that your mindset, if you have a growth mindset, then anything is possible. And I have a growth mindset. In other words, nothing is written in stone. You can improve yourself, you can change your circumstances. You can do anything within reason you want to do if you set your mind to it. Yeah. I strongly believe in that. People who have fixed mindset, they just believe, I can't do this, I can't do that. And that way of being and living they have it set in their minds. That to me is a certain type of a program or paradigm that, well, my dad used to do this, and sure, that's what I have to do. Yeah. And that's the way I was brought up. And sure, what else would I be doing anyway? As my mother would say, should they be talking about me that I have notions? Yeah. It was an old-fashioned way of looking at things. Yeah. But I strongly believe that when somebody wants to make changes, that part of that is that you're resetting yourself. It's like the phones. It's like you're rebooting yourself. But we are all capable of rebooting ourselves. I definitely did. And I'm helping a lot of people who want to reboot themselves. And like my transition or my changes were huge because they had to be, because of the situation I was in. But for somebody who sits in front of me who just wants one particular area in their life that they want to target and improve, the changes can be massive for them. Yeah, and I think what we referenced there with the growth mindset, I think it was Carol Dweck who originally came out or had come up with that. I'm sure people had figured it out before her, but she was one who kind of coined it. She was, yeah. But with the growth mindset, what's an example? How could you give people an example of what that means? Is it like when I look at, when I suppose to talk a small bit about my own people, or the own people I work with myself. Sorry, now I'm jumping over and back. But what I always say to them is, I say you need to watch the language you use about your body. So you need to watch about how you talk about your body. If you're talking about your body negatively, that's going to come through negatively, and you're going to have negative mindset around it. You're going to have negative thought patterns. Obviously, your whole perspective about your body is going to be negative, and even though you're working on it, it's going to be very difficult to make change because you're reinforcing it with negative attitudes and negative beliefs. So I guess my question is, when you're looking at a growth mindset, what's an example of a growth mindset, and then how do you start to implement that a small bit more? Yeah, well, sport, I suppose, would be a good place to look at because, like, when you're involved in sport, you're going to win some days and you're going to lose other days. But I find if people have a growth mindset about it, that you're not going to better your opponent every time you go out. If you're a golfer, you're not going to be on your A game. If you're a cyclist, you're not going to win every race. It's the same all through. But there are days where you'll do nothing wrong.
Yeah.
And it's the days when things don't go right. Those are the days that you learn loads. And for somebody with a growth mindset, in those situations where things don't go to plan and don't go right and you hit your head off the wall, those are the days where somebody with a growth mindset turns around and says, well, okay, what's the learning here? There's no learning, Máirtín. We lost the fucking semi-final. We were beaten by a pint. And I say, but hold on a minute. For 14 sessions in the middle of winter, there was only 12 lads training. 23 only showed up 10 times. If we improved that, if people bought into it, if they improved their own input personally to have brought the team along, wouldn't that be a huge improvement? That's a growth mindset.
Yeah.
Hold on a minute, lads. We got to the semi-final. Who would have thought when we started the year that we'd have got this far? We blooded 3 young players. They're only 18 years of age. We brought them along. That's a growth mindset. Somebody with a negative, fixed mindset saying, fuck's sake, no, I'm not going to put in the same effort next year. What effort did you put in? What improvements did you make? Did you improve your diet? Did you cut out alcohol? It's the same in everything that you do. It's the growth mindset that you kind of say, well, what are my learnings here? But it can be really hard at times, depending on the situation.
Yeah, and the degree of the failure as well.
And the degree of what happens. Like, how many people do I know that go to Everest to climb it and they have to turn around because of bad weather? How many people go to Carrantoul? But it's so foggy and conditions are not right. And you just have to decide, well, okay, I have to come back another day. But I trained for this. Let's chance it. No, it's not the right time to do it.
Yeah.
Today isn't our day. But what are we learning? Well, we've trained. Sure, we have another couple of weeks now to train. We'll come back and do it again.
Yeah. And I guess even I know you went to Everest Base Camp yourself, and you climbed Kilimanjaro in the last year.
I did Kilimanjaro in February. Yes, yeah.
What's the goal with climbing mountains? Why is that such a? I don't want to use the word fixation, but where do you get the enjoyment out of it? What do you learn from it? Coming from that growth mindset, why do you go after these type of challenges?
Somebody asked me recently, why do I train a lot? And I just simply said, Pat, it's what I do. I said, I don't look at it as a chore. I don't look at it that I'm killing myself. I said, I look at it as something that I enjoy. I said, I think my body, most of the time, thanks me for it. I'm not a young man anymore, but I enjoy doing it. The challenge side of stuff, I had completed probably predominantly for 20 years, cycling was a huge part of what I used to do. I did a lot of stuff in France. I used to go to Spain and work in Mallorca with a company there that used to bring people out for cycling holidays. I led groups out there with the National Council for the Blind to raise funds. We used to go to France and ride 7 and 8 of the hardest stages of the Tour de France. I've ridden in Italy, in the Dolomites. My bicycle has brought me all over the world. But 5 years ago there, 6 years ago, I started just doing a bit of hiking in the Burren. I'd moved to Kinvara. I'm living in Kinvara for the last almost 8 years now. Burren is on my doorstep. And I began to get a different appreciation for challenges from the point of view of I could put a rucksack on, I could go out up into the Burren and just enjoy the peacefulness. I could challenge myself as much as I wanted, but it was different to the bike. And I began to look at, I suppose, the more serious challenges. I looked at Everest and Everest Base Camp, and I said, maybe I'll prepare for that. So I went to Scotland, did did a bit of preparation in Scotland a couple of times, did some winter training there. My son decided that he'd go to Everest Base Camp with me, which was huge. It was lovely for the two of us to do it together. We saw strengths and weaknesses in each other, and we were helpful to one another. It was great for us as father and son. That actually, being in the Himalayas, I found it very spiritual.
Yeah.
I found the simplicity of life there, what they accept and take as normal. Most of our Western society wouldn't put up with. And it opened my eyes to, how the way we're living our life here. I had a different appreciation after coming back. It forced me some of the nights when it was minus 25, as we went up towards base camp and Gorak Shep and the likes, where breathing was hard. It forced me to look at my life. But ironically enough, it was my past life I looked at. I went through some of the nights a lot of the pain that I had struggled with, and I thought a lot about what I had come through. With the results, then without going on, I could do another podcast on that one, Robbie, but without going on about it too long, with the result that when I came back, I was adamant about two things. One was that I was going to become a life coach.
Yeah.
And that I was going to do the course and stop talking about it, which I had been doing. And secondly, I was going to write a book. And that was 2018, and I have completed and achieved both things, and I found that massive. You mentioned Kilimanjaro. Everest Base Camp and Kalapata were about 5,800 metres, just under 6,000 metres. Kilimanjaro was 6,000 metres, so I went higher there. But as luck would happen, or have it, I ended up in a tent on my own in Kilimanjaro. I wasn't supposed to be, but I was. And the reason I say luck would have it, it gave me a lot of time to think. And the long nights was cold again, not as bad as Everest. But I did a lot of thinking, but I was only talking to someone about this in the last couple of weeks. My thinking this time was totally different. My thinking about what I was thinking about because the forefront of my mind was where I was now in February 2022 and where I was going forward and who was relevant in my life now. And I found that very emotional as well. I was way quieter than I normally would be in the group because I had a lot of thoughts going on, and I was thinking a lot about where my journey was going and where my journey was leading me. As regards challenging myself then, Robbie, the third part of that question you asked me, and doing these, some people would look at them as extreme challenges, and they probably are. I don't look at them like that. I look at the preparation. I love it. I love having a structure, and I know that from dealing with clients that most people set goals. But I do a lot of study. I'm constantly reading up on stuff. I think I was telling you that the last night. And I was reading something recently, I forget who it was now, but it'll come to me later. And he was talking about goal setting, and he was talking about people having different types of goals, and he called them an A-type, B-type and C-type. Mm. The A-type where, I suppose normally we'd have them like, we'd like to change the car.
Yeah.
Or the likes, and kind of we might have done it before, but you save a bit of money or you go to the credit union or whatever, and it's not kind of knock the lights out, but I changed my car. Like.
Yeah.
Somebody else might say, geez, I want to move out from the parents, or I want to get married, I want to get a mortgage, I want to build a house or buy a house or something. So it's another goal. But then he mentioned the C goals, and he said for C goal people, he said usually a goal in the C category is something that scares the living fucking daylights out of you, something that you really have to put a lot of work into. I think I'm a C goal kind of person. I thrive with C goals. There's no certainty whether you're going to complete them, whether you're going to be successful or not, but I like the idea of preparing for them. I have the mindset that I don't mind putting myself, I suppose, through, some people might say, the hardships of preparation and the ordeal of training. I quite enjoy it. And if I can help others interested in doing similar things, if I can inspire people by what I do, it's great. It's part of my business now when I set up Mind Over Mountains as a life coach. The other part I wanted to focus on was outdoor adventure, challenges. The name, Mind Over Mountains, came up actually. There's a lady who helps me a lot with some of the marketing stuff, Vivian Malloy, and we were butting heads or comparing notes or whatever you want to say one evening about it, and she said, "You always talk about mindset," she said. And I said, "Yeah, and I talk about mountains." And she said, "Yeah, but could we tie the two together?" Well, I said, "I firmly believe," I said, "that most people," I said, "their mountains or their challenges in their lives," I said, "are mountains to some people. But," I said, "it's a lot about your mind and your mindset."
Yeah.
And that's where Mind Over Mountains came from. Then with the book, a lot of my story is dealing, there's the success and there's the highs, but there's dealing with the adversity and getting over that. So it was called Mind Over Mountains as well. My social medias are Mind Over Mountains. On Instagram, I'm the Mind Over Mountains. So the brand is there now.
Yeah. And it's I suppose it's really tied into it or weaved into it. What is looking at the horizon then, I suppose, like what's the plan now over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, the main plan really is to establish my business a bit more. I'm in the throes of starting a podcast. I'll be picking your brains about all that.
Yeah.
So I will. You've been very successful with it.
Not a problem.
And you have a big following. And it's something I'd like to do. There's a second book, I know, in the back of my head at the moment, but I've left it there because the last one took a lot out of me. Emotionally, for anyone who's read it, they can understand it. Because I had to go back and pull the scabs off old wounds.
Yeah.
And talk about them in such a way that people who might be going through certain things might get something from the book and some takeaways. And further to that, then I'm going to do, I didn't actually, I said it to you off mic, I'm going to do part of the Camino.
Oh yeah,
with Dolores, my fiance actually, next week, September 7th. I'm going to Rhodes in Greece with Sean Kelly and a group of cyclists to do 7 days of cycling out there in October. And then in January, I'm looking at doing another one of the 7 summits, which is called Aconcagua. It's in the Andes in Argentina. So at the back of my mind, that's the sea goal. I'm preparing and training for that as well. Lovely.
Okay. And do you think at some stage will you go for the 7 summits, considering that you have 2 of them in the bag?
It's a step by step, really. It would. I would. It is in my plans to try and summit Everest.
Yeah.
If I stay healthy.
Yeah.
I will see how I progress at 7,000 meters.
Yeah,
with that high altitude stuff, it's progression and it's seen. And if I'm violently sick and I can't do it and I get altitude sickness, I may have to rethink the whole thing.
Yeah.
But the other thing about it is that people are really interested in that type of challenge and people like to see how you're doing. And like the other side of Mind Over Mountains is that I will on an ongoing basis hope to be able to help people who want to make changes in their own lives. I hope to be able to go into companies at corporate level, give talks, and I do a lot of schools, secondary schools in particular, and I really enjoy that. I talk to them about life and dealing with adversity and building resilience and facing challenges, and I get very positive feedback for that. With sports, I'm still involved with Gart hurling at the moment, and I enjoy that side as well. So I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I love it actually, and there's nothing I love more than seeing somebody sitting in front of me and the light bulbs going on for them in their lives. It's brilliant. It's lovely to see.
Oh no, that's excellent. That's great. I think, to be honest, Máirtín, I'd say we've probably covered enough in that podcast. We're going. You wouldn't even think it. We're going an hour and 15 now. At this stage, it does fly when you're jumping over and back. But what I always say to people before I leave actually is, I'd like to ask you first, what does health mean to you? What does it mean to be healthy? It was the first one. And then the second one is, do you have anything that you'd like to leave with people who may listen to the podcast, who may be struggling with their own mental health at the moment, and what they can do about that? But I suppose the first one is, what does health mean to you?
Okay, well, my tagline actually in Mind Over Mountains is live your best life. Now, it's one that's probably overused, but I strongly believe that if you want something and if you want to make changes, the only person with that control is yourself. You may not think so and you may not realise it, but every one of us has the power to make changes. And sometimes it can be the smallest changes you make that can have a huge effect on your life and those closest to you. And if there's a goal or if there's something out there that you want to reach out and get, go and talk to someone, tell a friend, but make the plan and set that goal. Because I do believe that anything you want to achieve, you can do so within reason, with the right mindset.
Yeah, that's fair. No, I think that's excellent to leave at for now. I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks a million. It was excellent, and coming up here from Kinvara up to the pub on a quiet day or a lovely day outside is thanks a million for taking the time out of your day. I know you have a busy schedule. Where can people find you?
Well, as I said, I'm on social media. I'm on LinkedIn at Máirtín Óg McDonagh and Mind Over Mountains. I'm on Facebook as Mind Over Mountains. I'm on Instagram as The Mind Over Mountains. And I have a website if anyone's interested in buying the book. You can get it off Amazon, but if you buy it off my own website, I'll make a few pounds out of it. And it's my own website is www.mindovermountains.ie.
Perfect.
And just as we finish, Robbie, because you did ask me, if there's anyone struggling with where they're at the moment, I would strongly say don't be afraid to reach out to someone. And it doesn't have to be a professional person like a life coach or a counsellor or a therapist. It can be just a friend of yours. Make a call. Tell them that you're not feeling great. And it just lifts that initial load off you that you feel that, you can't control or that it's consuming you. Just reach out, make that call and talk to someone.
Perfect. I think what we'll do is that's a great point to finish up on. So thanks a million for everybody for listening in again. And as I said, thanks a million for Máirtín for jumping on. If everyone or anyone who liked this, I'd love if you could rate it on Spotify, subscribe on Spotify and iTunes, and you can also find it on YouTube as well. And I'd love if you could subscribe there, because I'm looking to build the YouTube platform. And if anyone is looking to get in contact with Máirtín, you can find him on Instagram at Mind Over Mountains, and on then Mind Over Mountains, and on Facebook at Mind Over Mountains. And check out the website, because he does have a lot of blogs there, and he has programs as well that are available. So check that out if you are interested in working with him. But as I said, thank you all for listening, and I will chat to you all again soon. Have a good one.